Thanks for tuning in to Season 4 of Strange, Rare, and Peculiar Homeopathy Podcast, where homeopathy lives, breathes, and evolves with Denise Straiges and Alastair Gray. We'll be exploring modern practice, research, and philosophy, from Hahnemann's radical insights to today's breakthroughs and discoveries. Get ready for homeopathy woes, feedback from pros, and the more you knows.
Hello.
Hello.
Right. Let's go.
You forgot your good morning, good
Yeah,
afternoon, all year,
whatever.
Well,
Hey, good morning, afternoon, evening.
are you just confused because it's tomorrow?
It is tomorrow. It's a beautiful day
Look
in
where we are.
sunny Philadelphia in January.
Not.
And the snow is, well, it is, but we're not there.
We avoided that one.
Yeah. No, we're on the west coast of the North Island in the
Of New Zealand.
crickets and the bellbirds
Yes.
and the tuis and wood pigeons of Piha.
It is absolutely beautiful. We decided we would
Ah,
record this outside so that you could hear the birds and the things just because
and the bees.
and the bees, because if you've not been here before, it is one of the most gorgeous places. I love this part of the country so much.
Yeah, it's amazing. We're on our way home. We're heading back to the US tomorrow. Been a month
Yep.
in New Zealand visiting my family. Thank you.
Yes.
I owe you.
A pleasure.
Getting
Getting up early for work,
and also
which
getting
I
up
really like.
very early.
I really like that.
5:30 lectures.
But we thought since we were here that we would have kind of the down under conversation. And I'm particularly interested in that because you have such deep roots here. It's so, I mean, not just a part of who you are familially, but your homeopathy journey is so
First heard of the
over
word
here.
in homeopathy in Dunedin in the rainy 1980s,
And it's still raining,
which
in
was
case
the
you were wondering.
1960s
Yeah.
for the rest of the world.
It's still raining. Actually, I would say something funny, which is not funny, but we've been here for a month and it has been, I mean, the weather in New Zealand has not been amazing for anyone. But last night I woke up in the middle of the night and I looked outside. Out the place where we're staying has this big window, and we're up on this hill and we can actually see the sea from beyond. And I saw the stars for the first time in a month, and they were so incredibly bright.
Yep.
And because where we are, there's just, there's not a lot of competing light sources, and it looked like they were like, you could, if I reached my arm out, I could touch them. It was incredible. Anyway, but yeah, you encountered um homeopathy, and you just decided pretty soon that was going to be your career.
Yeah, I did. It was such a compelling experience. And I wrote to 5, 10 different places, and then I called Misha Norland, and
he answered the phone.
I thought Misha was a woman.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
And I was surprised. I said, "Oh, can I talk to Misha?" He said, "Hello, Misha." And I'd imagined a tall, 6'4", lanky Englishman, and Misha, when I met him, finally was everything that was not that. And but what a voice, huh?
Oh my gosh. Yep.
Nice voice.
Yes.
Um,
So you traveled to study, but then you came back, right? And
oh,
you
I did.
settled in Australia, and that's where your career really,
Yeah,
you hit
yeah.
the ground running.
I
Can you
did.
just talk about that? I mean, there's a, I almost hate to I almost hate to talk about homeopathy as a business, but I think, as we talked about in the last podcast, there is, I mean, it is a business, and many of us do it as our, as our career. And but there's also this like commoditization and da da da. But I think if we think about Australia in the years you were there, what year did you move?
96.
96. It was it was alive. It was such a,
It really was. Dynamic profession.
yeah.
I arrived and sort of thought, well, if I'm here and my identity and everything is tied up with homeopathy, I best sort of meet who's here. But I was busy very quickly. I found myself a job in a kind of I was going to say health food shop, but without the food. So health food, apothecary, herbs, candles, that sort of a place.
Patchouli.
Patchouli.
Yeah.
I smelled
Smell
of
like
patchouli.
patchouli.
And I fitted right in because I was growing a beard. I had long hair, that most of the time was in a French plat from the Napoleonic Wars and a bassoon.
Outfits, yeah, your bassoon
Because I was
outfit.
influenced
Yeah.
by those Three Musketeers movies, and I had a lot of those shirts, and I looked the part.
I
And
love that you own that part of yourself, honestly.
yeah, I looked ridiculous.
What a great place to be.
Yeah,
I
Sydney
mean,
in the 90s was somewhere I aimed right for the middle of town in Glebe in the inner west, and I got busy really quickly. And I got busy with a whole lot of folks, kind of just straight up Australian folks. They call a spade and
a prostate, a prostrate.
a prostrate, and it was a lot of, oh, can you fix my bits? Um, and uh, and I realized I was a little bit unprepared, but not totally unprepared. But I had to really reorient my thinking about how I talked about homeopathy, how I presented myself.
Yep.
And I got busy quick. I had $232 the day that
Oh
I
my gosh.
landed.
But there's something about that that I think is really important because it's there's a way in which Australia really it almost exemplified homeopathy in its sort of practical application. And
Yeah.
that's the thing that I love about when you talk about your establishment of your practice there. People presented with actual problems
Mm.
and they would be, a physical problem,
I remember,
not a spiritual kind of
yeah, my colleagues, my colleagues had business cards that said practitioner of homeopathic medicine. There's no hiding the medicine part,
right.
and the ethos there was similar to the US now, except there was no problem about dispensing. There was no problem about I'm going to give you a medicine now. You've got a problem, come and see me.
Yep.
You've got a
Well, you were
healthcare
part
problem.
of the NHS, right?
Well, no, actually, that's a
Did
no.
that come later?
Well, no, that's health insurance and a national health service were separate, and homeopathy was easily paid for by patients from their private health insurance, and that meant that there was no because it's out of
Fee for
pocket.
service,
Yeah,
right. In
yeah, we call it out of pocket,
Mhm.
and so it meant there was no drama about or no difference between going to the GP where you paid out of pocket and then you got the money back when you
Yep.
went to Medicare, I think it was, and then or going to see the homeopath. And so plenty of mums and kids went to see the homeopath. I remember a colleague that I met in the early days in Sydney, Ken Duran, was busier than a one
One
arm
a paper hanger
one arm paper hanger
or a one-tooth mouse in a cheddar factory.
in a cheddar factory. I mean, he was busy, and the thing that impressed me most about him, which would be just you really, was that his office was in a tower block on George Street in Sydney. That's the main street. It's Broadway,
Mhm.
you know, and and he and a couple of other colleagues practiced there. Um, and then he also had his home office. I
Right.
remember him being incredibly busy. Another colleague, Dr. David Levy, incredibly busy, inner city practice,
Yep.
doing straight up homeopathy.
Right.
No angles, no nothing, just, mum,
But
kids.
but then it
Um,
changed. And I wanna, like, before we kind of go down this road, right? Because there is a
mm,
misunderstanding about what happened, and one of the things about homeopathy that gets on my last one is that everybody's got a victim mentality
mm,
and everybody, we band together as victims, which I guess that part isn't bad. It's like everybody bands together. It's like we have to save homeopathy and all this. But I think that we need to ask the questions about why things happen. And so Australia had, as I was saying, this like incredible heartbeat of integrative medicine as just a part of the services. And then they didn't. And there had been a lot of conversation focusing specifically on the Australia report. Most of you, or many of you, will have heard of it. And it was basically, there was definitely controversy about a report that was issued, retracted, and then reissued that at first saw homeopathy as a legitimate part of the, healthcare market and then didn't. And so there's obviously a lot of conversation to be had about about that.
Well, the story of the decline has got nothing to do with the bad guys on the outside attacking
Exactly.
homeopathy.
And that's the point that we have to make, because the narratives, it's just like the narrative that happens in America. Oh, it was Flexner. Oh, it is big pharma. Oh, it's the man. That's what happened to homeopathy. And if you go back through the archives, you'll see that, if you go back last season, we did one on Flexner to talk about the decline of homeopathy in the 19th century in the United States. The homeopaths weren't taking responsibility for their actions. Same thing happened in Australia. And so it was really easy to band together and put it all on an external problem as opposed to having some internal recognition.
It's a bit the way that it occurred to me over the years. I've thought about how did it happen. It's a bit like a tree that grows too quickly.
Yeah.
And then the big heavy snowfall comes and it loses some of its branches.
Talk about that.
Australian homeopathy grew really, really quickly. Like when I was there, for example, there was a state branch of the Australian Homeopathic Society in every state that was all active and sometimes competing against each other. There were many, many, many schools that taught either homeopathy, straight up homeopathy, the Sydney College of Homeopathic Medicine, and then there were the naturopathic colleges or the integrative colleges, and they were in Sydney, Nature Care. And the guy who ran Nature Care had done a deal with, forgotten his name, Sherwood, who had a giant naturopathic integrative school in Melbourne and in Brisbane, Australian College Naturopathic of Natural, ACNM, Natural Medicine, Australian College of Natural Medicine. So they were separate. There was the Australian College of Natural Therapies in Sydney. There was Nature Care in Sydney. And so very quickly, I was working and teaching in all of those places, and getting the feel that, not all is well. And one of the I don't want to name names in many ways, but
No.
one of the problems was that it was clear that homeopathy was reaching a new audience, and the new audience included the Skeptic Society, but in addition to that, different government departments. On the one hand, we had all of our educational ducks in a row. All of those schools were accredited, and students were getting their student loans paid.
And the accreditation was through an accreditor that understood homeopathy. It wasn't
Well, the Australian government, yeah,
Yeah.
was the Australian qualifications, I think it was the Australian Qualifications Authority, and then they had the homeopathic side of education was taken care of by ARO, Australian Register of Homeopaths. There's also other naturopathic organisations that did accreditation and validation of courses. But it was quite clear that there was there were 3 court cases that happened in a short amount of time.
This is really key for everyone to just think about.
And homeopathy is on the front page of the paper too often. And it was, homeopathy, and unfortunate clinical outcomes, but also homeopaths advertising illegally, homeopaths making claims in their websites they could never ever dream of backing up, and things started to get a little bit dicey. When you contacted me, I was the head of the homeopathy department. I had been at Endeavour College. There were 5,500 students at Endeavour College, and I ran the red-headed stepchild department, and we were there always battling and fighting for students, and
Right, because one of the things that
punching above our
surprised me
weight.
by that point, well,
What?
nothing for the people who can't see it, it's Al's antics if you're only listening on a podcast app and not seeing the video.
And then the story that I've heard, and when I say I've heard, it's from my contacts within the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration. Now, the TGA is the FDA of Australia, and they deal with products and all the law around products and all the advertising around products as well. So it's FTC and the FDA rolled into one. And the TGA folks said, we had to act. We could no longer stand by and watch all of this illegal activity go on and not do anything.
This is really key, people.
And so the illegal activity included transporting illegal products across state lines. It sounds like
What would be an illegal product?
a nosode that had
Oh.
no verification about where it came from or manufacturing quality behind it.
Does that sound like anything that you've heard happening in the United States?
Yeah, well, it
Yeah,
does.
but-
Yeah. So transporting remedies, false advertising, or at least misleading advertising.
And so that would be making a claim, someone saying, I've cured someone's, complex disease, that kind of claim, or I can.
Yeah.
Right.
Or homeopathy can.
Yeah.
And rather than, just sensible, under the radar suggesting, homeopathy has been known to be very effective in these situations, just making straight up balls out claims, it's like, wow. And so the FDA had to act. And the other thing that's really critical was it was totally clear that the Australian government could no longer support its private health industry commitments. And so when the decision was made to investigate using health technology reporting, so that's different from systematic reviews or sort of a hardcore research approach, it was, we need to get reports on if these things that we are funding are any good or not, and then we can make decisions whether to integrate them or not, like the Swiss did in 2011. And they did a technology report and concluded, well, homeopathy is really effective, so it's in, and we'll pay for it. So that's the reason why if you're in Switzerland, you can go to the homeopath. The British did the same thing and concluded homeopathy's out, and that's why it's been sliced off the NHS in the UK.
Mhm.
So the Australians went about this process. There were 37, maybe 32, 37 modalities of complementary medicine that were investigated, and homeopathy was first.
Yep.
And it was always going to be first. And I remember getting a phone call from someone in the TGA asking me to be on the board of the first report and go through the process, put my name up, and then I found out subsequently that my name was taken off the list because I would be biased on that
But you
in that
did,
process.
but you did testify or present to the FDA equivalent.
Mm.
And can you talk about that?
Well, I went and spoke at the TGA about homeopathy and its use overseas, about its history, about its successes in epidemic diseases. And I tell you what, this audience, mainly of chemists and folks that work at the TGA, the response was overwhelmingly, well, we never heard about that ever. All we hear about are these breaches that are being made by you crazy people on the TGA, on the, through false advertising and through the sales of remedies and other stuff. So it was, I had that kind of relationship with them. And then,
which is really important, right? And I think this is one of the things that I think has been really effective in the way that Paula Brown and the Americans for Homeopathy Choice have gone about their sort of grassroots conversations with the FDA and with, getting legislation in, is that by going through and having real people talk about real experiences, they were appealing from this grassroots level, which is, I think, different than the practitioners intervening and saying, I can do this. You've got these real life users saying, I had this experience, therefore. And I think that's sort of one level, right? Like, we demand to have this accessible to us
Australia
because it's important.
Yeah, we had no advocacy group for consumers, that's for sure.
So that would be important. But
Back
then
in the day.
there's this other thing, right, in America now, but talking about Australia, because it went from homeopathy being robust, earning a living, getting reimbursements, busy, the schools were busy, the pharmacies were busy, the practitioners were certainly busy, and the
We were
consumers were
busy.
getting what they needed. And then these things happen.
Yeah, the 3 court cases and then the reports.
The 3 court cases, these were not, I think one of them was that a kid died. And the judge said, it's not the homeopathy, it's the hubris, meaning the hubris of the practitioner
Mm.
and the sort of the claims and I'm going to say irresponsibility.
Yeah.
The other case was someone who was accused of over-servicing a client of hers who had died. And the family then came after the death of the client. You'll correct me if I'm saying this
Yeah,
right.
you got it.
Yeah.
You got it.
And so they were concerned that there was an over-servicing. In other words, this person was utilizing homeopathy in lieu of conventional.
Taking advantage of a vulnerable person and poor practices,
Mhm.
but it hit the headlines because the client died. It involved cancer
Yeah. Yeah.
treatment,
And then the third one.
and the third court case that was in the news was the advertising,
Mm.
advertising breaches, and then the report was commissioned. Then that process began, and that's when the funny business also came in. And so that's where, to an extent, some people just focusing on the report are correct, because the report, it was the first one. They probably didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what they were getting into. It came back. We know now that it came back with an extremely favorable view of homeopathy, and that was exactly what the let's call it the vested interests in the political sphere in Australia didn't want.
Yeah.
They shelved it, so it's only come to light after years and years of complaints and wrangling and Freedom of Information Acts and stuff like that. And then a second report was commissioned, and of course it came back with exactly what they wanted. And that's where the bad science did come in. Because, I mean, to get the result they did, it meant we're going to write a report, but we're going to ignore all research not done in English. We're going to ignore all research where the study involved a sample of less than 150 participants, thereby wiping out all of the great research that we've got on homeopathy, including Jennifer Jacobs' amazing children's diarrhea study,
Mhm.
and other shameful bits of science that have no precedent or place in a technology report or in a systematic review.
But there's a lesson to be learned because we can look at it through the lens and say
But they
that
had to do it.
they had to do it
Yeah.
because, and they had to do it. I mean, they were going, that's the way that the chips fall
Mm.
when egregious behavior happens. And it's really unfortunate. Like when you and I first met, it was before things really had started to fall apart in
Mm.
Australia. And I remember hearing about
Yeah.
that, the robust economy and the seriousness with which you were able to engage with your clients. And we had a conversation about sort of the ways that practice and education went. We met at a conference. I was representing a school. And yeah, and we had a long conversation about that. Anyway, and then fast forward, some years later,
Mm.
when when I asked you about some of the challenges that we were facing in the American educational system, and my goal was, how do I sort of get this rigor happening that I assumed was the state of play in Australia, and how to rethink the sort of monetary market for education, like because at the time you were working for a college, and how can education become part of integrative medical education, and so on and so forth. And by that time things had imploded.
Mm.
And when and so the Endeavor College had over 5,000 students, and I said, one of my first questions to you is how many of them were in the homeopathy department, and you said
Well, a fraction at that time. I don't know. What did I say?
it
What
was
was my
less
answer?
than 100.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Totally. It was
I
it was
was
not great numbers.
no, and things were just falling apart.
Mm.
And then soon there were no schools.
Well, then as we head into the demise, Endeavour College was bought and sold like 4 times in a very short amount of time, because
Private equity.
private equity money, that whole business model of stripping out all of the substance of a an institution or a business
Yeah.
in order to sell it. And when Endeavour was sold, I'm going to say in 2019, my memory's a bit hazy. I got sacked on Skype. So
You
thank
still
you.
had, well, you
Thank
had
you for your service.
a small
Bye.
you only had a small contract there at that point.
Yeah, but it was still a
Still.
contract. But it was also, it was very easy, I think, for the new owners to say, look around the business and say, let's cut that one and that one and that one.
Yeah.
And so homeopathy went from having multiple colleges to, in the later part of the second decade of this century, to having one or two scattered around the country, and at the same time dealing with online learning, dealing with the complexities of the pandemic and all the rest of it.
I mean, the point was there was such a dearth of availability that we've since adapted our time zone, our teaching to make it more doable for folks from the Southern Hemisphere just because the options weren't there. Like
Yeah.
in the beginning, we had people coming in the middle, they're getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever to come to school. And we've had to adapt that because it really, everything changed. And I guess the moral of the story is that, we are a part of everything around us. The political environment, the ways that we behave, all of us affects everybody. People will say, like, if I bring up in my cautionary tale way, all it takes is one dead kid and the whole thing goes down. Everybody says, oh, it happens in medicine all the time. People have their injuries from medicine and it's not like that way. It's not like that when you are in homeopathy.
No, we're
Right? The
extremely
failure of one
yeah.
is the vulnerability of all. And so there's
Plus
this
the reality that, if you get a cough in America, the rest of the world gets a cold,
yeah,
and the impact of that story, or that unfortunate event, would have an impact, and does have an impact, in every other part of the.
you're talking about what happened in Australia.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
totally.
Yep.
And so that's why we wanted to just have this conversation to get people thinking about, what happens, like how can we learn from what happened in Australia to say we have multiple choices. There are always multiple roads we can take. And we could take the high road of doing really good homeopathy and really, rigorous review of what we're doing, sort of get taken seriously, or in the mindset of scaling up, we can wind up delivering a mediocre product. So like in the vacuum of sort of authority, meaning we're a self-regulated profession in most places,
Mm.
it means that we have to, kind of watch our own backs and take care of each other. We're only as strong as our weakest link. So when everything shuts down and then educational institutions pop up, it's easy to make giant promises. Anybody can call themselves a professor, but do they actually have professorial authority, right? Which means something. I'm not going to call myself a professor in the institution that we're in.
It means something.
It means something. I mean, this is, we just don't have that institutional thing. But I think, we need to be really mindful. So I guess the next step, right? You have a conversation like this where you go, okay, what happened in Australia? We don't want to see that happen in other parts of the world, because then, you kind of lose. And now people are like rising up and trying to just, sort of capture market share, which is good because we need the education to be there, but it's about quality. I'm listening to an audio book that was written by Lou Frankfurt, the president of Coach. So my background is, I went to business school in the in the 80s, and I worked in kind of the fashion and business kind of thing. And Coach Leatherwear, Coach, when I first started working there, was a privately held company that was then acquired and went through this exponential growth period. They went from being a $5 million company to a $50 million company, I think, in the time that I was there. And it was, and Lou Frankfurt was probably one of the most impactful people. I don't think I realized it until listening to this book that he wrote about this pursuit of excellence and what happens in a business. But I had to laugh because this thing about raising the bar that we talk about at AHG, like we're, raising the bar. I realized it came from Lou Frankfurt, who said to me one time, because I was like 24 years old and I made a typo. So I was involved with writing, communications, internal and external communications, and I was working on a presentation for him, writing a presentation. And I will never forget, I had a typo. I spelled commitment with 2 M's and 2 T's. And I remember this from it's how many years ago, right? And he gave me a talking to. And that's probably why I'm maniacal about things like that now. But this book is about how, if you scale up, right? You're only as good as your last 30 days. You're only as good as the last thing that you've produced. Your quality, your integrity, right? Your mission is so important. The values on which you base your, your whole sort of ethos of what you do. And that's making, fashion accessories. It's not healthcare, right? But it's been impactful to listen to this book, to think about how even in businesses that are just creating fine leather goods as opposed to children's health, dealing with children's health, that there can be an ethos of quality and of like doing the right thing, sort of checking on your quality. I'm listening. I'm not finished the book yet, but I'm listening to the part. This is long subsequent to when I left. Um, I left in 91. I was there for 6 years. Um, they're talking about when they started manufacturing in China and what it meant,
Right.
yeah, to move from American factory. Like when I worked there, the factory was on the floor above where my office was, and what it was like to go and how they were so on top of it. Were the ethics of the manufacturing there? Were the factory workers well taken care of, knowing what the implications could be? They made sure that they had total control over it. Now we can sort of look at that and say, well, that's what homeopaths are wanting to do when it comes to manufacturing. And I totally appreciate that. Like we have to have that. But we're, in homeopathy, we've got like this, it's so much bigger than that, right? It's so much bigger. Like if you were to look at a situational analysis of homeopathy, right? If you're only as good as your last 30 days, you could translate that to you're only as strong as your weakest link. Right? So like as a community, we should identify what the weak links are, whatever they are, whether it's in education, whether it's in research, whether it's in, products that we deliver, whatever the case may be, and then get together and really think about that. But if we put our heads in the sand, like you talked about crossing state lines in Australia with products, you were kind of pussyfooting around it, but it's no zones. Yeah. So like I was just teaching today in our semester 2 class in the full-time group about Hahnemann's chronic diseases, their peculiar nature and their homeopathic cure. And we talked all about the idea of a miasm and a nosode and an anti-miasmatic remedy. And then we started looking at these things categorically and deconstructing from a critically thought through point what each of these means. And naturally, you have to get into the conversation about what are these substances. And then a smart student is going to say, can you reproduce that? I'll just, I'll always call on the, herring and serinum example. People might get tired of hearing it, but I hope that you hear it enough times that you can tell somebody else, right? The medicine serinum, proved by Constantine Herring in 1830 when he was in Suriname, may not actually be the substance that we think it is. And he was still testing on presumably the same substance in 1856. Well, how did he store it? Is that still the source material? If it's not what we thought it is, then does the information we have today match the information we used to have? How can we not ask those questions, right? If homeopathy as a paradigm is based on single substance, giving one remedy at a time, because that's what we know it to be, that's how we know the safety and efficacy. So, the NCH can drop single remedy from its, definition of homeopathy. That's fine. I can also tell you that I'm 6 feet tall and you won't know because you're on Zoom.
She's 6 foot.
I'm almost 5'6". Stand up straight. But do you know what I'm saying? So we can say that, we can remove that, but then do we get caught with our pants down? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be the person who's asked that question. You have a bug on your head. I don't want to be the person who's asked the question and then I have to answer it in front of a judge as opposed to in front of my peers who have as much skin in the game as I do, that you do, that all of us do. Right. And so the tale about Australia is like, well, we can be a victim or we can be proactive in our conversations about lots of things. Not just, I mean, nosodes are one example because, I mean, if we open that door, we have to walk through it, right? We have to have a conversation about these substances, not just Serenum, but every single, biological substance we're using. If we want to cross that Rubicon, then we have to ask the question about SAR codes, for which there is no primary information in Hahnemannian homeopathy about. Doesn't mean that we can't use it, but do we have adequate and robust data on which to prescribe these substances?
Well, here's an example, an Australian example.
Yeah.
So, the pharmacies around the world will sell Moreton Bay fig as a homeopathic remedy.
Yep.
Right? And they will sell whitetail spider.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't collect the whitetail spider substance because I bought it from a pharmacy. And I'm assuming that the pharmacy got a whitetail spider, steeped it in alcohol
Right.
for, a number of days, and
Yeah.
then used that as the mother tincture. But I can tell you how the Moreton Bay fig tree remedy was started. And when I think about it, from the point of view of what you just said about is the substance what we think it is, then I jumped over the fence at the Botanic Gardens one night,
As one does.
snuck into the gardens, went to a Moreton Bay fig tree, cut some roots that hang down from the first branches, collected some sap, got a couple of fruit, some leaves, and some bark, put it all in a bag, took it home, put on the rubber gloves, and put it all in ethanol. Left it for about 3 weeks, and then manufactured the remedies and ran up the remedies from there. And then, every time I got a call from a pharmacy, I'd send them some of my
So you
stock.
maintained, right, the stock material.
So in other words, if you're a compliance pharmacist, and by God, I hope no one ever hears what I just said, but that's pretty poor quality control. It's a homeopath doing homeopathic work. But if you're manufacturing substances that are going to be given to kids and sick people,
Well, and if they're biological,
wow. And then, it's
then you
different
add
if they're
in,
biological.
because it's, yeah. And so these are questions that, like,
Yeah.
if we have them together, because we could, I feel like we're putting our heads in the sand. People say, oh, don't talk about that. Well, I have to talk about that. Sorry. Because I just feel like, part of it is we see so many clients because of the our clinics, the setup of our clinics. So, with HHN, Homeopathy Help, now we have our acute care network. So we're like, tipping over the 7,000 case point. We keep records of everything, not just like the outcomes based information. How do people do? But everything. Same goes with our chronic clinic. And then our, the supervision, students who are in supervision, tight supervision, where all this record keeping, everybody's watch, la, 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 la. So we're collecting all this data. You start to see trends, because if you're collecting data and you're reviewing that information, you start to see certain things. And you also, when you teach really smart people, they ask you difficult questions, and then you have to find out the answers for them. And so along the lines of like these things, remember this season of our podcast is called Truth, and it is about seeking, just all of us sort of kind of owning what we know about homeopathy, being realistic about what we don't know. Because just because we don't know doesn't mean we can't find out. Like, just because we don't have this information about nosodes doesn't mean that we can't conduct ethical provings, right? And having, the AIH started out as, a place to do provings. There used to be provers guilds. There's no reason why that can't come to pass in a way that, and I'm not saying that we need to do it in like some, sort of nod to the man, but rather if we just think of what are the holes and the gaps that we need to fill, right? What are the ways that we should be consistent about the information that we have? And also because we have this monologue of, homeopathy is safe. You can't, you can take any remedy that you want, as much of it as you want, and nothing will happen. You can take them all every day and nothing bad will happen.
Can I tell you a statistic that I heard today in my lecture
Oh, I heard that.
at 5:30 in the morning? 21% of clients in a study had adverse reactions. 21%. That's almost a quarter. Some of them were homeopathic aggravations, and therefore they got better, but not all. And in addition to
Where
that,
is that published?
Stub, it's the Norwegian paper, and 68% of studies and that was looked at in a systematic review includes information about adverse reactions to remedies. 68% of studies.
Does those would be considered avoidable with proper training?
No, there's no inference about that, or that's not what was being explored.
But as a person who,
No, I don't, because I believe that if I look at I believe that if I looked at my practice, if I went back and knew what I know now, if I knew now what I know now, when I was younger, if I had kept good or better records about the times that my client said I felt shit for 4 days and then I got better, and I recorded that as an aggravation, and also then simply recorded whether it was mild, moderate, or severe, I'd be in a much better place now to be able to have an opinion. But I know that I've had adverse reactions
but
that are not aggravations.
was that when you were prescribing primarily using centesimal?
I'm going to say, yeah, I don't think I've had an aggravation. I don't think I've had an aggravation, touching wood.
Yeah.
Since I've predominantly been using
50
the
millisimoles.
50 millisimols.
See, this is the thing. That's why I think what we have going for us is that when we are committed to best practices, then we can move away from those adverse events.
I would like to do a whole podcast on safety at some point. Can we?
Yeah, but will anyone listen?
Will you listen? It's the reason I'm saying that is because I found a folder of everything that I've ever read on aggravations and adverse events.
Oh, right. We were just talking about that.
There's 15 different publications that focus on it, and I've just been working my way through them all. And so I feel that at some point I might want to share some words of something.
Yeah.
Let it be.
Right, because like I want to do a fairy tale version of how people think homeopathy is and works.
Oh, wow.
Like it's a fantasy. And it's like you can do whatever you want and it'll fix everything. And you don't need to go to school. And you can just have an intuitive relationship with your brain injured child who has a dual diagnosis of autism and pandas and give them 1,500 remedies inside of a year and nothing bad will happen. No, in fact, they'll levitate and then they'll fly. Like this is ridiculous, all the things we tell ourselves. Whereas if you have a medicine that's this incredibly powerful, you need to learn how to use it. And if all you're trying to do is commoditize it and monetize it or scale it up, how many students, honestly, can a school have and really attend to them?
And attend to them.
What does it take to attend to a student? Like, what does it take to become a successful homeopath? Like, to really understand how to do the job, you know? I think even more than we provide. And I think I laugh and tell the students, we put a lot of vegetables in your smoothies. In other words, we're hiding, hiding how many hours because it really does take a lot. It's like, it's a lot of work. And so,
Student support vegetables. Is that what you're saying?
student support, but also just, like it takes a lot to learn it. So we've got to figure out how do we do this, especially if we can't recruit, like we can't change the medical system as it stands. That's going to be a slow trickle in to create systemic change because the infrastructure of the medical model is gazillions of bazillions of dollars. They're in the tank. So we've got to peripherally get this change made. And we have the ways that we can do it. We can do it with acute care, right? That's kind of the easy one, is high quality, really good acute care. The second thing, though, is people who have deep chronic diseases, autoimmune diseases, are not being serviced by the medical community, and everybody knows it.
In no way.
Unless you are, I mean, sure, there are lots of people whose cases are being managed with some of the immunosuppressants and so forth, but it's a long road, and it's difficult, and how much do we want to suppress our immune systems? So if we can get homeopaths really trained up to deal with complex immunity, that you don't learn that. Like when I see first semester students posting online that they've cured these cases of deep complex autoimmunity and telling the public, that scares the crap out of me, because that's exactly what
Sounds like 2006 in
right?
Australia.
That's Australia 2006. Like, we don't want to go back to that.
No.
Let's be realistic about what it takes.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to somebody for a mani-pedi. I'll give you, okay. I got my eyebrows done by the person that does my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's eyebrows.
This is a wandering conversation. Tell me.
Well, but I'm just talking about, I had such pause. I thought, am I going to let a person I've never met do my eyebrows? The eyebrows, people. I was going to say they grow back, but at a certain age, not as much as they used to. I had a unibrow for much of my life, so I know this. But you get a mani-pedi, they have to be licensed. I don't want to go to a salon that doesn't have, like, not just a nice vibe, but clean tools, right? We don't hold homeopaths up to that same criteria of a mani-pedi or an eyebrow wax. We expect that you just, people go to school for less. I really wanted her to do Al's eyebrows. He hid from the room. The woman made a house call. I was like, get a load of these eyebrows. Anyway, we had a Grandpa Munster conversation. But do you know what I mean? I mean, I think, like, we have to let's just respect the modality. That's not a diss to anyone. That's like a call to action for all of us. I'm down. Let's do it. Right?
Let's do it today.
Okay. I'm teaching another class. So are you. What are you teaching?
I'm teaching case management in 1 hour.
Ah, 1 hour. That means I'm teaching in 1 hour. I am teaching in our semester 4 class, eating disorders.
Oh.
Which I once saw somebody posting online, like, top 5 remedies for eating disorders. I was like, no, it is a complex mental, emotional, and physical pathology that, like, really
Sure is.
requires us to ask some serious questions about what we're doing.
Yeah.
So that is part of our suite of complex case management lectures.
That's what we're doing here on the balcony.
Are you teaching out here?
I think I might.
We make a lot of our big decisions doing paper, rock, and scissors, best out of 3.
Yeah, you also got the chainsaw and other noises as well. Yeah.
Anyway, hey, thanks for listening, guys.
See you next time.
Let's
Stay
do
tight.
it again. See ya.
Got a packed schedule, but still dreaming of becoming a homeopath? AHE's part-time professional program brings real-time classes, live clinical training, and a full professional curriculum, all 100% online. It's rigorous. It's legit. And yes, it's built for people who have jobs, kids, lives, and a whole lot of ambition. Start your journey to licensure without hitting pause on your life. Visit ahe.online and take the first step.